this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
In today's fast-changing world, leadership is no longer just about driving profit, it's about driving purpose. Today's guest is an internationally recognized brand futurist, best-selling author, and sought-after keynote speaker. Simon Mainwaring is the founder and CEO of We First, a strategic consultancy that helps purpose-driven companies accelerate growth and impact. He's worked with some of the world's most iconic brands, guiding them to shift from a me first to a we first mindset that fuels collaboration, trust, and sustainable success. Simon is the author of We First, a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Amazon bestseller, and his latest book, Lead with We, is a Wall Street Journal bestseller, an Axiom Gold medalist in leadership, and one of Forbes' top 10 leadership strategy books. He also hosts the Lead with We podcast, writes the Purpose at Work column for Forbes, and has been named one of the top 5 marketing speakers in the world for 5 years running. His firm is a certified B Corporation, recognized as a Real Leaders Top 100 Impact Company, and Simon himself serves on advisory boards for Sustainable Brands, Conscious Capitalism LA, and the Forbes Business Council. Today, we're diving into the powerful ideas behind Lead with We and exploring how leaders can unite teams, inspire purpose, and create lasting impact by putting we at the heart of everything we do. Simon, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Clint. Great to be here as well.
So I don't know if you've listened to the podcast before, but if you haven't, think of all of our visitors and guests as basically superheroes. And every superhero has an origin story, so what's yours? How'd you get to where you are today?
Thank you for asking. And thanks to everyone for listening in. And my early career was as an advertising guy, a copywriter. You write the ads out there, the campaigns you see on TV and so on. And I did that in Australia, London, and in the US. And I was one of the writers on Nike. It's a great agency, Wyden & Kennedy up in Portland. And then I was worldwide creative director on Motorola. So I was doing that career. And towards the end of that career, I was feeling a little bit unchallenged. You try all these different things, but you're still looking for that itch that you want to scratch. And at the same time, something personal happened that really did change the course of my life, in the sense that my father had been sick for a long time, and I was in Los Angeles in my home, and there were 5 messages on the answering machine one morning I woke up. And the first message was from my mum, yelling down the phone, trying to wake me up in my bedroom from the kitchen on their answering machine. Simon, wake up, wake up. Another message, Simon, wake up, please wake up. Third message, my sister yelling down the phone, Simon, wake up. Fourth message, Simon, please wake up. Last message, Simon, Dad died. He was calling to say goodbye. Call us when you wake up.
Oh, wow.
And those words, wake up, took on a profundity for me that I don't even think she intended, because I'd been somebody in the advertising business, appropriately selling sheet metal and sneakers and shoes and all these things over the years. But I don't think I've really found a way to connect to something that was really meaningful to me in terms of my purpose. And so I was professionally feeling unchallenged, and I was personally destabilized. And rather than try and solve for it, I just sort of sat in my sort of sadness about my dad for a while. And I happened to read the speech that Bill Gates gave at the World Economic Forum, where he said, 2008, the big global economic meltdown had happened. And he said, we need the private sector to play a bigger role in social change. It's having this negative effect. We need business to show up differently. So I took that very much to heart. And I spent 3 years writing a book called We First, How Brands and Consumers Use Social Media to Build a Better World, that you kindly mentioned. And that was the launch of my consultancy, We First Branding, that specializes in the strategy, sustainability, culture building, and impact storytelling for brands that are doing good. And it focuses on how do you capture business value from doing good? Why? So that you get rewarded for it, so you can do more of it. And the ambition is really that business more broadly can have a greater positive impact sooner to solve some of the issues that we're facing. So I'd love to tell you that it was strategic, planned, it was all meant to be, but really life came along, slapped me in the side of the head and said, you need to go a different direction.
So that's a pretty powerful story. So sorry about your dad.
No, that was just the way that life unfolded. And in some ways, I have to say, that catalyst in my life, oddly enough, has made me feel closer to him in ways that I never imagined, because it was so instrumental in where I find myself now. So I see it as an odd thing to say, but almost like a gift, that his loss came with this incredible silver lining. And so I feel his presence all the time, which is amazing.
So what led you to write Lead with We?
Well, I wrote We First, whose idea is basically an antidote or a tonic to the me first mentality that was driving business up to that point. And my team and I had committed 10 years of doing this work. And yet I felt like we weren't moving far enough, fast enough. There are so many issues to solve for, whether it's the environment, whether it's the way we treat people, it's, underserved communities in society and so on. And I thought, if we're not moving far enough, fast enough, what can I share about accelerating and scaling impact movements through business? And we'd done this work for 10 years for wonderful brands like Tom's, Timberland, Virgin Unites, Seventh Generation, Crocs, Chobani, Allbirds, and you learn stuff. You learn pattern recognition. You learn what works and what doesn't because you're doing it for real, meat and potato stuff, day in, day out for brands that really need success. And so I laid out all the learnings that we'd had in those first 10 years in Lead with We, the business revolution that will save our future, because it's all about activating business more effectively to have an impact. And so I just wanted to give away all the learnings that we'd had on the way.
Maybe we can start by explaining the core concept of Lead with We and how it fundamentally differs from the me first business approaches.
Yeah, I think, consciously or not, for a long time, and in many ways still today, business is self-serving, whether you look at it through the lens of, shareholder returns, whether it's quarterly, reporting, whether it's earnings calls, the markets really dictate. And it's always like, are you going up and to the right? Which is obviously, to some degree, healthy self-interest. But at the same time, often it comes at the cost of collective well-being, because it seems that a smaller and smaller number of people around the world are benefiting disproportionately, while a large number of people and society and communities around the world are really struggling. And I don't think it has to be that either or proposition. I think that business can thrive in ways that really support society and really support communities. So the me first mentality is really your success, your well-being at the cost of everybody else. The we first approach and leading with we is really about engaging the greatest number of stakeholders in service of the greatest collective benefit. Now, oddly enough, that sounds very altruistic. It sounds like you're doing good for others, but it's actually the most selfish thing you can do. Because only when the whole is well, whether that's the planet, whether it's society, whether it's your community, whether it's your company, only when the whole is well can the parts, as in you, your employees, stakeholders, can they thrive. So actually taking care of the well-being of the whole is really the most selfish thing you can do. So leading with we is about choosing to lead, not sit on the sidelines, not wait for somebody else, not waiting for government or nonprofits or NGOs or foundations to fix it, choosing to lead with taking a collaborative mindset. So it's not just you on your own, but you've got this human scaffolding which shares the load. Lead with we, which is the greatest number of people to create the greatest collective benefit. Again, so that we can be excited about our future, so that, the communities in which we live can thrive, rather than being this zero-sum game where some do well and at the cost of everybody else.
You had a boss once who, when he said it was a win-win, it means he won and you lost. That's it. That was the only way it was a win-win game.
And there's little good that comes from pointing fingers, but I think we know in society these days, there seems to be those who are doing very, very well, and there's a growing number of people that are really struggling, whether you're looking at it through the lens of the US, the EU, or different markets around the world. And what I'm so excited about to this day, after 15 years of doing this work, was, but startups, high growth companies, and these big global enterprises, is that I think business is uniquely equipped to deliver to your bottom line and positive impact. And there are so many great examples of companies that are doing that well and that are rewarded for doing so. And I think sometimes we are our own worst enemy, in that, we are all good-natured by heart, and we do care about each other, and we do care about the planet. We are, it's hardwired into our DNA. It's chemically reinforced in our bodies. So I think sometimes that natural disposition gives way to this sort of self-interested mindset, which is often fear-based and scarcity-based. And so we're going to get as much as we can for ourselves and damn the consequences. But that is a very perilous short game. And we need to play a longer game if everyone's going to do well.
You mentioned there was a couple of, there are many companies who do this and do it well and see the benefits. And you have in the book what you call the virtuous spiral model. And I was wondering if maybe it's just lead with we and that's all that is, but if there's more you could talk about there, but then also can you give an example of a company that you think really exhibits these strengths?
The virtuous spiral is really this idea that, if you imagine a spiral in your mind's eye, it's like a tornado. It spins upwards. But what people fail to often think about is it also circles back down to its origin. So the idea there is that you actually create benefit, and that starts with you as an individual leader, a CEO. And then that ladders up to the next sort of turn in the spiral, which is inside your company, your employees. And then the next level is, okay, you're engaging consumers. And the next level, you're engaging your partners out there in the marketplace. It might be for profit, it might be non-profit. And the next, you're leading larger cultural conversations out there in the world, whether it's, how you manage your supply chain, how you treat people, the type of products you take to market. When you not only do that individually yourself, but you engage the collective efforts of all of those different stakeholders, it's not just additive, it's exponential. It's a force multiplier for the good that you're doing in the world. And once you've done that, that collective benefit then flows back down to your partners, to consumers, to your employees, and to the company. And so you want to create this virtuous cycle where everyone's engaged. And at the same time, that engagement creates greater collective benefit for everybody. And there are many, many companies that do this well. I'll give an example. There's a chocolate company out of the UK called Tony's Chocolonely, whose core mission is to take child slavery out of the cocoa supply chain, which is a huge problem. And they have really married record growth and success from a business, P&L, balance sheet, bottom line point of view, with having a positive impact, creating awareness around the issue. Or you've got a wonderful company here in the US called Traditional Medicinals, which is, the fastest growing herbal tea brand that has a deep, deep commitment to plant wisdom and the supplier communities that make those herbs possible. Things like Throat Coat and Smooth Move and products that a lot of folks know. What these companies do is they have a foundational purpose, and all the way upstream to their suppliers and all the way downstream to retailers and consumers, they engage them around an idea that's larger than themselves, which is being of service to your cocoa supply chain and its responsibility, or being of service to your supplier communities and the roles that, herbal medicine and plant wisdom can play in people's lives. And by being of service to that higher order, commitment, they build their business, they drive engagements from their stakeholders, and everyone feels like they're part of something that's meaningful in their individual lives. And that's a very powerful dynamic inside companies.
I think the company that came to mind when I was reading the book was Patagonia, I believe it's called.
Sure.
They're like the poster child. I think all their money.
That's why I avoided them. I know the folks at Patagonia well and have known them for a long time. And I think, it's funny, if you're in this space, at some point, you're not allowed to mention a quote from Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, who was, a poster child. And then also you can't talk about Patagonia. And, what is instructive about Patagonia was obviously, their commitment is to save our home planet. And they've got these incredibly sustainable products and incredible breadth of commitments to the earth and our land and Patagonia itself. But when they actually transferred ownership over to nonprofits committed to climate action, and they made the planet their only stakeholder, that was a new benchmark in terms of the commitment of companies, albeit private companies, but still, it set a new high water mark.
For sure. There were a couple, as a small business owner myself, so I'm definitely a capitalist at heart. There are a couple quotes in the book that I really thought were interesting as they pertain to the role of capitalism. One was by Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's fame, who said, "The end result of capitalism is not unlike a monopoly game. One guy gets all the bucks and everybody else loses." And I got to admit, I never thought of it that way. And then contrasted that was Klaus Schwab, who's the founder of the World Economic Forum you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. He argues that companies should aim to create long-term value rather than short-term profits. And you advocate for a we first capitalism as a kind of an evolution. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. And I don't find those two quotes at odds, actually. So Firstly, I had an interesting experience recently that I'll share with you, which is instructive to this question. Having written these 2 books, I was really like, what do we need to be doing differently in business that we don't know? And as I did my research, I realized we don't need to learn something new. We need to remember what we forgot, which is our innate connection to each other as human beings and to the planet. We feel it when we look at a sunrise, when we climb a mountain and look out over the view. We just know it as human beings. You have these moments of awe. And also when we hug someone we care about, there's just this connection to each other. So I went with a wonderful woman, Lynn Twist, who wrote a book called The Soul of Money. I went to the sacred headwaters of the Amazon in Ecuador and Peru, and I spent 21 days with indigenous tribes there. And through a translator, one piece of wisdom that was shared with me from one of the tribesmen there was, they consider that anyone who takes more than they need a sign of mental ill health or madness, literal madness. Because if you take more than you need, you're threatening the whole, like I was talking about before. And therefore you're sabotaging your own well-being, which is madness. It's almost like the proverbial sci-fi movie where you see the person attacking the oxygen system on the spaceship, and you're like, what are you doing? Without oxygen, we're all going to die. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like that. In a similar way, with Ben & Jerry's, they have self-stated that they're a social mission company that happens to make ice cream. And they've got a number of different core commitments that they support through the sale of ice cream. And obviously they're quite activist by nature. Not every brand needs to be that way, but they are. At the same time, Klaus in the World Economic Forum, what he's talking about with long-term value is he's actually distinguishing between long-term and short-term gain. And, the short-term mentality that is institutionalized through, quarterly earnings reportings and all those sorts of things, that has really precipitated a mindset that compounds this scarcity, fear-based, winner-takes-all dynamic that we see playing out in so many different ways in business. And I think as there's more and more extremely wealthy people and the cost of living is harder for more and more people, I think that's almost getting exacerbated now. It's getting harder and harder. Everyone's like freaking out and we've got to grab what we can because things are getting tougher. What Klaus is talking about is really, the World Economic Forum is where, heads of state and business leaders from around the world come together to solve these big problems. He's really talking about long-term value beyond just monetary value inside a company. He's talking about natural capitalism. He's talking about value to the environment, to society, and yes, to shareholders. So those quotes actually align. Ben & Jerry's is more activist by nature. Klaus in the World Economic Forum, which has its own challenges, is really an institution that has really rallied those leaders in positions of power to be of service to, the planet as a whole.
I think 3 things came to mind when you were talking. One is I've worked with many Fortune 500 companies in my career, and I've actually seen some really good initiatives go by the wayside because they would impact in a negative way short-term earnings, even though it'd be a long-term win. And it's like the mentality was, well, if I don't get the short-term win, I won't be around to see the long-term benefit, so we're not going to do this initiative, which is just, okay.
Well, there is compelling logic there from a self-interest point of view. I mean, you see it in the political process as well. Your thinking is only the lifespan of your election cycle and the midterms and all these sorts of things. But what we're seeing, perhaps most importantly right now, is a shift in the financial markets. For a long time, the investor class wasn't at the table. They were like, just show me the money, damn the consequences. But as issues like climate and biodiversity and ocean acidification, all of which affects supply chains, like if you can make the stuff that makes the cotton, that makes the t-shirt, like real meat and potato stuff, as those issues have become more and more pressing, the investor class is now going, well, wait a second, we don't want to invest in a company that's not sustainable in the sense that it's not set up to survive in 10 or 20 or 30 years because it's not respecting its supply chain, its people, the planet that makes its products possible. And it's also, if these companies are not sustainable in the sense that they're not actively contributing towards the solutions we need, because these investors realize that the more and more a company does harm instead of good, the more they expose themselves to risk, not just from the media, not just from consumers, but from their own employees. And we've seen so many examples of employees calling out their own companies now. So the investor class, for good reasons and bad, have woken up to the fact and said, well, actually, if we want to get the greatest shareholder return, we better be smart about who we invest in. These companies need to be sustainable. And that's a positive shift.
The other part you said there that resonated with me was, talking about the health of the whole. They've actually, you went to the headwaters of the Amazon for 21 days, but I read there's some research that's done that you actually can improve your health if you just take a walk in the forest, right? So just
forest bathing is one of the terms out there now.
Yeah. And that increases your health. And the other one was don't take too much. And now I'm reminded of the toilet paper debacle during the pandemic here. It's like, if everybody just took what they needed, we'd have enough. But because you went and hoarded it all, now there's a shortage.
Absolutely true. Like, some of this stuff can sound lofty, and we're talking about capitalism at the high level. It is so brass tacks. I mean, all of us know that when we're stressed, we're having a bad day, we've had an argument with a husband, wife, significant other, we go for a walk. Or if we want to we take our shoes off, we go for a walk on the beach or on the grass, we feel better. You don't have to call it grounding. You don't have to call it all these fancy things. You're just like, I don't know what it was, but I was feeling pretty bad. And I went for a walk in nature and it felt better. I just felt like I was being nurtured in some way. And in a similar way, I think instinctively we know that if we keep taking everything for ourselves and forget about everybody else, at some point that's going to break, especially when everybody does it.
Yeah.
It just logically doesn't make sense. So all of these sort of lofty economic discussions and, explorations of capitalism and people who write books about it, like you and me, it's common sense. It's just common sense. And I think, I don't mean to speak for everyone, but I'd like to think that we would all be happier and better off if we knew that we weren't just taking care of ourselves, but we were taking care of others at the same time, so that our families, our communities, our future can be positive for everyone,
We were chatting before we started recording, and then I had this note early in the book. You talk about how important trust is and how misinformation or disinformation can negatively impact that. And it kind of warps everybody's perception of reality. And there was a sense that really struck with me. It says, if we can't agree on the world we live in, how can we possibly fix it? And then you go on to say the disinformation, deliberate or unintended, has become and will continue to be a huge obstacle to all authentic connections. And I'm really big on connections. And I know you wrote the book, I think back in 2021 is when it was published. So kind of the early days of the pandemic. Over the last 4 years, AI has also exploded. So I was wondering how has the last 4 years really influenced what your thinking was? Has it reinforced it? Has it made it better, worse? What do you think?
Well, when I first wrote the book, misinformation was on the rise, where we were starting to go, well, what's true and what's not? And that was propagated by the news outlets, social media, and so on and so on. At the same time, we were almost decolonizing ourselves. And what I mean by that is, who you met, Simon, was a function of who you saw on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest. These avatars, these replacements for ourselves, where we curate how we appear to other people, was more and more people's experience of me, of you, of your kids, your daughters, your sons, whatever, because we're all using social media. So it was a strange moment in time because we were almost being disassociated from who we really are, and people's interactions with us were becoming predominantly through social media and digital channels. And then on top of that, you had a lot of misinformation on the rise, where truth sort of started to come into question, and we saw that a lot in politics and so on. As you say, since then, we now have AI. And not only does AI hallucinate in its own right, where, the computational power is such that some of the things it said are amazing, but some of the things it brings back are actually not true, or it's making them up, or you don't know where it came from. So that's adding a whole other layer on top. And then at the same time, it's giving each of us the power to auto-generate so much damn content that it's going to be a fire hose from everyone all the time. Meanwhile, truth is up for grabs. You can make it whatever you want it to be. And we're interacting with avatars of ourselves out there on different channels. So as someone who is so old, I grew up in a world where the telephone was tied to the wall and we had to wait to call our girlfriend till she got home because you couldn't, all that good stuff. It's potentially maddening. Like, I've got a 26 and a 22-year-old daughter, and they're really struggling to understand this world that they live in. And I think truth is a cornerstone on which we use as a foundation on which to build knowledge and make choices and live our lives. And when truth is so fungible, it's just this wet clay to be moved around as people want. I think it can get very disorientating, especially when it applies to issues that have a direct impact on our personal lives or our communities or our families. You don't know what is true anymore because you're getting a fire hose of information that has strong biases in it one way or another. So I think, like many people out there, I'm actually actively managing my mental health by only taking in so much of the news, managing how much I take in of social media, much so than I used to, and really trying to have an objective and questioning mindset when we look at content out there today, because AI is only going to get more and more effective. There is going to be real-time, full production, full resolution video that looks very convincing that people are making up, that, and they've got their own interest behind it, and it's going to be unstoppable and just unimaginable how much of it there is going to be.
I mean, it's already close. There are many videos that I see online where if you don't look closely, if you look closely, you'll notice that the lips don't quite match the words.
Yeah,
but that's going to be refined. And at some point, unless you physically were in the room, you won't be able to trust what you're saying.
Maybe we're not here, Clint. Maybe we're not here. Maybe this is just AI. Maybe, oh no, we're a glitch in the matrix. No, it will come to that point. And then, there's a compounding disinformation spiral here where there was a time where social media was trained by you and I out in the real world doing what we do, and we told them what we're interested in. Now there are so many data points through our mobile phones and through everything that our experience of the world comes through the web, social media, AI, informed by all the data that it knows about us through all these real-time data points. So our experience of the real world is being curated for us before we even get to experience it. And then that's compounded by all of this content. So we're going to get more and more polarized or set in our ways than ever before. And I am concerned where that will lead.
I agree. I think there's two things that are kind of depressing to think about. One is you mentioned, which is we need, in order to build anything, we have to have a foundation of trust, a foundation of what's true, right? What is true? What is wet? What is dry? What are the facts? And if we can't agree on those facts, then we're going to have a hard time building any kind of a community, because my facts are alternative facts to you. And, there needs to be some base of this is non-negotiable. These are the facts. And I think that's obfuscated. And the other thing, I can't remember where I read this. This is not my idea, but I read it recently or saw it recently somewhere. Large language models have been trained to this point based on all the data that's out there in the universe that we humans created. But as more and more of that stuff gets, like we talked about offline,
ingested,
created there, AI can write a book. And as they create more and more of that stuff with the hallucinations, and then they take that back in as fact. I mean, it's really scary.
It is scary, and it's a concern too that some of the research and testing that's been done has shown that human biases show up in, what AI is generating as well, many of which are not what we'd want to see in our world. And they get compounded and reinforced. I don't see it though as scary, and I don't see the situation as depressing. When we look at any one moment in time, we can throw our hands up and say the sky's falling in.
Yeah.
But if we pull back and look at the long-term horizon, this is a meaningful blip in the radar, but it's only a small blip in terms of where things are headed. And my strong instinct for where things are headed is there are challenging times ahead of us, no doubt. But these are necessarily painful times, because we have to get to a point that we realize that the way we're thinking and acting on the basis of that thinking does not serve our individual or collective future. And until that reality plays out, we are not going to shift either individually or collectively on a sufficient scale to get it done. Now, yes, that's bad news that we've got to go through this process, but it's also good news that we're moving through this process. I don't believe that this is the end of humanity. I don't believe that we're going to put our species out of business. And if we do, then it's part of the evolutionary cycle where species come and go. It's happened thousands, if not millions of times before. So thanks for playing. But at the same time, I think the human spirit, our innate ingenuity, and our deep and profound connection to the natural world, there will come a point when we realize that if we work with nature rather than against it, and we're a service to each other as well as ourselves, we can really do extraordinary things very quickly. But we need to get it to a sufficient point of pain before that shift happens.
I think that point's coming.
Yeah, we're running as fast as we can towards that cliff.
We really
Clint
are.
says. Yeah.
So continuing with the trust theme, you referenced in the book the Edelman Trust Barometer when you were pointing out that there's a crisis of trust in major institutions, including business. And then I think, if I recall, you even said that there was an addendum to that where the trust in business actually increased a little bit at the beginning of the pandemic. So how does embracing this lead with we approach help companies build, or in some cases rebuild, trust with their consumers or employees, their whole ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the world has changed a lot in the last 3 years since I wrote the book. And what I would say is that what COVID did, which was so powerful, was it reframed the role of business dramatically. If you think about February 2020, up till that point, it was unheard of that a company would send all of its employees home, or the whole country would send their employees home, or companies around the world would send all their employees home. It was unheard of that they would provide mental health and well-being to the whole human being. It was unheard of that they would re-engineer their supply chain to make masks and ventilators. It really shifted the role of companies from being sort of self-serving, stakeholder or shareholder-driven organizations to being first responders to crises on a national or local level. And you can't unsee that. And it has changed the way that employees and consumers look at the role of companies out there. There's an expectation that they've got to show up a certain way. At the same time, right now, business has got to deal with a retreat, shall we say, in ESG and DE&I and a lot of the commitments that companies might otherwise make to their people and the planet. So there's been a sort of flex backwards at the same time. But this lead with we mentality allows a company, and not just those purposeful leaders like the Patagonias or Ben & Jerry's or traditional medicinals that we talked about, not just those ones, but everyone, to say, we exist as a company to add value to consumers' lives and the communities and society in which they live. We are additive and we are positive. We're not just extractive and transactional. And the reason that adds value is because it builds your reputation over your competitors. It differentiates you from competitors. It allows you to attract the talent you want, because more and more people, especially Gen Z, want to work for companies that are doing good because they know that their future's at stake. It allows you to foster a culture that's more resilient in the face of all these challenges. I mean, churn inside your company is very costly. It allows you to innovate the type of products you make and change the way you take them to market so that you resonate with a growing number of conscious consumers, boomers all the way through to Gen Z. And it really just more broadly makes you relevant to a future that is increasingly being defined by crisis. Because I tell you, I know this to be a fact, as someone who's been a marketer for 30 years and for 15 years has been doing this work with purposeful brands, the tolerance for companies that are serving themselves at the expense of consumers and employees and the planet is getting very, very thin because people are worried about their future. So a lead with we mentality can really set you up for relevance and resonance and reach, in the days ahead.
And those employees they're very communicative about it as well. So they use Glassdoor and social media to talk openly about their companies.
Absolutely. I mean, there's been Google and Facebook and so many examples where companies have employees have called their companies to task, and not without good reason, whether it's a non-alignment with their self-stated values and what they're doing. It's very complicated too right now because you've got government contractors that are walking back values that they've had for a long time, because they have to be mindful of, the political environment as well as the cultural landscape. It's a challenging time for business leaders, but all of that is to say that it doesn't matter where you are in the value chain of a company, whether you're a supplier, an employee, a customer, a partner, you want to work with a brand that you feel good about being associated with and who walks their talk. And I think that's what really wins the day.
Well, that concludes part one of my conversation with Simon Mainwaring, founder and CEO of WeFirst, author of multiple best-selling books, and one of the most sought-after marketing speakers in the world. Coming up in part two, Simon discusses why companies should utilize strategic storytelling to highlight the good things they're doing in the world.
If you're a nonprofit NGO or foundation, there's so much good you can do. We need business, though, to stop creating more problems and provide more solutions. And I'm like, well, how do we get business to do that? Well, you've got to inspire companies to do good, But then you've got to tell that story well so they can capture value for doing it. So it's not a cost center, it's a profit center as well. And so the last 15 years has been really helping companies not just do good. Many companies are doing good. They wouldn't talk about it. You didn't know about it. They just did it through their foundation or philanthropy. But we help them at a strategy level, whether you're an enterprise or parent company, or at a brand level, whether you're a startup, to frame the story they tell to their employees and consumers so that at point of sale, at retail, with their customers, it can really resonate. People say, you know what? I like the product, and I also like who you are as a company.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.